Story 1. Rotten meat left in a refrigerator during a power outage. I opened the door and nearly saw my soul leave my body. Story 2. I contracted Clostridioides difficile while I was hospitalized for septic shock due to my appendicitis. It was brutal. I kept apologizing to my nursing team. Story 3. The poor Espetvanex we rescued had rotting teeth in his mouth. 5 of them fell out during the cleaning, and 7 more were surgically removed. Even some of the bone in his jaw was rotted. His breath smelled very bad. When I first held him, I literally thought he had soiled himself. 2 weeks later, he was healed and acting like an entirely new cat. Story 4. A murder victim was left in a field for a week in summer in Kentucky. I was a photojournalist and the police really wanted me to see it. It was awful in every aspect. Story 5. When I worked Black Friday at Burlington Coat Factory as a cashier in 2012, a customer came to my register in a wheelchair, pushing a cart that was completely stuffed with clothes. She smelled extremely unpleasant, like cat urine, litter, body odor, mold, and worse. The people to our right and left were covering their faces with their shirts, and children were pinching their noses. She was directly in front of me, so I was unlucky enough to be in the path of the odor. Since her cart was full, she was frequently sitting and standing to grab items and pile them up. As soon as I finished ringing up one pile, she would stand, grab more, then sit back down. The noise and motion she made caused a strong odor that made me visibly gag and retch. I had to turn away, gagging and wiping tears. This woman had severe odor from her lower body. I cannot fully express how bad it was. After the interaction, I had to grab the air freshener from the bathroom and spray half the can around the area. I also wiped down the counter and floor near me. My coworkers and other customers all agreed on how bad the smell was. Story 6. When I was working in the intensive care unit, we received a patient in severe septic shock who was found half alive in his brother's semi-flooded basement, essentially glued to the moldy couch he was lying on. The man was extremely developmentally delayed, and the abuse lawsuits that followed were extensive. He was flown to us with half the skin on his back flayed off after the emergency medical technicians separated his body from the couch. Both of his legs were in severe states of gangrene and had the consistency of rotting driftwood you might find in a lake. He had maggots growing in them as well. The smell was overwhelming. I felt very sorry for the man. Story 7. Found a dead rodent when I was a child. I gave it a proper burial with a Bible reading. Friends and I were curious about it, so we dug it up about 5 days later. It was not doing well at all. Story 8. An older coworker once bent over near me, and his pants slid down, exposing his butt crack. It was full of dead skin, commonly known as smegma, and the smell is still burned in my memory. Story 9. Rotisserie chicken carcass left out in the sun for a few days is quite awful. However, the worst smell I have ever encountered was when my dog had diarrhea in the middle of the night from eating bacon. He was fine when we went to bed, but halfway through the night, the smell woke me up from a deep sleep, even though I was in another room with the door closed. I went out to see what was happening, and the poor dog was shivering. His nose was bloody from trying to cover the diarrhea splatters that were all over the floor and several feet up the walls. I comforted him and took him outside to relieve himself. When I got back inside, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, had also woken up and was already cleaning up. I had intended to clean it up myself and let her sleep. That was the moment I realized she was the woman I wanted to marry. Story 10. My parents had a freezer full of meat in the basement. The power went out once and never came back on for the freezer. 1 month later, we started to smell something. We were all nauseous from the smell. My mom even vomited when we were cleaning it up. The smell was indescribable. Story 11. Summer of 1995. I was 15, dating a girl and excited to spend the day with her on her family farm. I was a suburban kid with little experience in farm life, so she enjoyed showing me around. We ended the short tour and sat on a picnic table near an overgrown field. At some point, I noticed a small patch of yellow flowers in the field and quietly ran off to grab them and be romantic. A few steps into the tall grass, I slipped and fell. In a flash, I saw the sky, then darkness. Wet, hot, sticky darkness. My face was covered in mud. No, it was cow manure, warm and wet. But something else was mixed in. It looked like blood and guts. I was frozen, unable to move, think, or react. I lay there with my face in the bloody manure for what seemed like an eternity, my mind racing to identify the unfamiliar scent now ingrained in my nose. My nose, was it bleeding? I wiped and found fresh blood mixed with the old blood and manure. My mind reeled. I finally gathered myself. Sure, it was only seconds as she was still reacting. As I began to rise, the sticky, bloody mess came up with me. It was now part of me. I shook violently, trying to free myself from the foul mess I could now smell. A mixture of decay and diarrhea. I looked up and saw my girlfriend running full speed to her house. Long story short, I had slipped on a 4-day-old cow placenta, landing face first in fresh cow manure and injuring my nose, with the placenta trapped under my chest and neck. That was the time I had to shower at my date's house and go home wearing her father's baggy clothes. Story 12, Rot. Close second was a hoarder's house that smelled so much of cat urine that when they opened the door and we walked in, my mother and I, retrieving kittens for fostering, it hit us like a wall. You could feel it in the air, as if the smell was an entity trying to drag you down with it. When we got home, we changed our clothes and showered. I really wish we could have changed our skin. Yes, the kittens were adopted by loving homes, and being in the smell was worth it to get those kittens to their new families. Story 13, in my hometown, there was a human waste treatment plant right next to a harbor. The harbor was also adjacent to some agricultural fields that were fertilized with chicken manure. It was unbelievably awful. Story 14. When I had my wisdom teeth removed and woke up, I felt very sick and had to vomit. The nurse told me it was not unusual because you end up swallowing some blood. I swear I can still smell that blood and vomit if I think about it. Story 15. A rotten, moldy, refillable container of soap came from a room in the hotel where I worked at the time. I'm not kidding. I had smelled rotting meat, dead animals, manure, and other horrible odors before then. I didn't believe the concierge when he brought it down after the guest complained, saying it was the worst smell he had ever experienced and said, "No, seriously, smell it." To the rest of us on shift, I took a whiff and immediately felt nauseous, as did 2 other people. The smell lingered in my nostrils for about 5 hours, to the point I couldn't eat during my meal break. I still remember it vividly. I didn't know a smell like that could exist, and I don't know how it got that way. I'll never forget it. Story 16. This just happened a few weeks ago. My mom and I walked into a large fabric store. I immediately smelled a stench. It was body odor with some underlying stink added to the already pungent body odor. It kept getting stronger as I walked through the store until finally I rounded the corner to find a young adult man at the discount table in the very back of the building with an almost visible aura of stench around him. He looked clean, obviously not homeless, but his smell was indescribable. He was literally stinking up the building from one side to the other. We had to leave. It was that powerful and nauseating. I don't know how the employees tolerated it. Story 17. We caught our dog once completely inside the carcass of a well-rotted deer that was lying in a ditch alongside a road. She was having the time of her life. This was by far the worst smell I have ever experienced. We loved that dog, but she did some crazy things. Story 18. Burnt human. A man was very seriously burned at a worksite. They took him to the hospital, and I visited my dad's friend in the hospital that night. I was only 10 or 11 years old at the time, but you could smell him in the stairwell 2 floors down. I was unaware of the accident, but I knew immediately what the smell was. Story 19. On my gynecological rotation, I was asked to assist a woman with cancer of the vulva. She had diminished mental capacity, was capable enough to live alone within a complex overseen by staff, but was not sufficiently self-aware to realize she needed help for the cauliflower-like mass dangling from her vulva that caused her immense pain. It worsened to the point that she refused to urinate. To the best of my recollection, she would not consent to a catheter and was in pain from holding her urine. We believed she could not understand what we were asking, leading to much back and forth regarding the appropriate course of action. I was asked to assist her into a bath, hoping she would be able to urinate. Persuading her to agree was quite difficult. The sight and smell when I helped remove her underwear will never leave me. It smelled like death. I am unsure of what happened to her afterward, as I rotated to the neonatal intensive care unit after that. Story 20. I used to work in an orthopedic surgeon's office. Patient came in with gangrene. After she was treated and left, we had to shut down the office for the rest of the day and have it fumigated. I think I vomited 3 times while she was in the office. Story 21. Trying to have a bowel movement a few days after a hemicolectomy. Blood was trapped in my surgically repaired colon, and a few days later, I passed the old decaying blood, which had a very unpleasant odor. Story 22. My ex. No lie, he smelled awful. Maybe showered 3 times a month and only brushed his teeth a handful of times. He admitted to that. This is not just me not seeing him do it. Story 23. Everyone is going to say human decomposition, so I offer another perspective. When I was 4, my parents split up. My dad went to West Virginia without warning, and my mom took me to Amish country, Ohio, to be with my grandmother over the summer. Maybe a week or 2 before they separated. They went to the grocery store and stocked up with the equivalent of $300 worth of groceries in 2003. So a large amount. Well, over the summer, the electricity was cut off at home. I think you see where this is going. Months passed, and we all came back home. It was either August or September, and school was about to start for my brother and sister. My mom opened the fridge. There were a million flies. I vividly remember maggots crawling, and there were so many that it looked like the bottom of the fridge was warped and moving. No, it was just millions of maggots. 2 years ago, I found 3 dead bodies in various states of decay by accident on 3 separate occasions. The one that sticks with me the most is an unhoused young woman wrapped up in a blanket. I drive down this road every day for work. It got oddly warm one Saturday in March and the area smelled off. I pulled over, saw the blanket, pulled it, and her skin peeled off. She was still identifiable through her tattoos. She had been dead since about December. It was a horrific experience. Story 24. My dog used to express his anal glands when he got nervous. We were driving to another state, about 5 hours away. We had to pick up a friend who was riding in the back. We took the dog out to walk him while our friend got in the car. When he jumped in and saw her there, he got nervous and released the scent. There was no escaping it, no matter how many cigarettes I smoked or how long we left the windows down. There was an unpleasant smell in our kitchen for a while. We thought it was the sink drain, but nothing made it go away. Finally, we found a bag of liquefied potatoes behind the paper towels and bottle drying rack. I am not completely sure why, but I felt compelled not just to smell it up close, but to open the bag. I almost fell over. It was so potent. At least it went away quickly. Story 25. Vulture vomit is the most unpleasant smell. Second is decomposing flesh, which is the main component of vulture vomit. Bonus points for maggots. They seem to make the smell much worse. Third is pig vomit, followed by regular pig feces in 4th place. Story 26. Work in the emergency room. Diabetic feet must be among the worst cases. Alongside the rotting bowel we once removed from a patient, which stank up the entire surgery floor for days. Story 27. A seafood truck on the highway lost its refrigeration for a while. My mother was driving and had to pull over so we could both vomit. Story 28. I was out hunting once and approached a wounded turkey vulture that was unable to fly. It started vomiting half-digested carrion juice all over itself. It is a defense mechanism and a very effective one because it was the most putrid smell I have ever encountered and had me gagging. Story 29. A man who had passed away 3 weeks earlier and decomposed during an Indiana summer without air conditioning, with multiple animals in the house. His partially eaten, partially decomposed body was on top of all the alcohol bottles and beer cans, causing the place to smell very bad. Story 30. Gastrointestinal bleeds are rough. Maggots from a vaginal cyst were pretty bad. Neurogenic breathing is unpleasant. Visit the nursing forum for more information. Story 31. Gangrene. You smell it the moment you walk into the room. Dead, rotting human flesh. I worked in healthcare. Story 32. The second worst was the protein plant back home, where animals and parts of animals that are well past dead are sent to be cooked and rendered for animal feed and other undisclosed purposes. The absolute worst, though, was that protein plant on fire. Story 33. Uncommon answer, but rotten, moldy home foundation. If you have ever been in a condemned home in the summer, the overwhelming stench of urine, vermin, and mold is unbearable. Every instinct in your nervous system is screaming at you. Nothing of value is here. Nothing good is here. This place is dangerous. Something bad happens here. Until you cannot take it anymore. Story 34. When I was in procedural radiology, I had a patient whose cancer destroyed his colon and hip. Fecal matter was draining from his abdomen into his thigh, where it developed into a horrific, festering abscess. I had been a nurse on a stroke ward and a wound care nurse for most of my 15-year career by that point. I had encountered some of the worst odors imaginable and had built up a strong tolerance. However, the smell of this abscess was beyond anything I could imagine. It was so bad that people in the control room, for procedure rooms away, had to leave. We tried multiple remedies including mouthwash on masks, odor eliminators, coffee, and everything else we could think of, but it remained unbearable. People were involuntarily gagging and dry heaving. That was a Friday afternoon. When using the Seldinger technique, you insert a needle, then place a wire through it, remove the needle, and use the wire to position the catheter. The trocar was the only thing we forgot to clean when removing all traces of that case from the room. The small amount of fluid left in the needle when we removed it from the abscess remained in the sharps container all weekend and grew. By Monday morning, the entire procedural radiology department was uninhabitable. I am certain that no matter how long I live, this will remain the worst smell I have ever experienced. Story 35. I was driving down the road and was about 7 months pregnant at the time. I smelled a wretched, filthy odor and instantly started to vomit. I had to grab my empty coffee cup for the vomit. I had gotten behind a truck carrying the most pitiful, dirty, and sick chickens I had ever seen. Several were having seizures and were actively dying. I then saw the truck turn right into the Purdue chicken processing plant. Story 36. Gastric fluid from a dog that had an intestinal obstruction was drained via a nasogastric tube. The doctor accidentally spilled a bucket of it on my shoes. I had to throw them away. They were my favorite work shoes. Also, maggot-infested wounds do not smell pleasant. Story 37. I got punched in the face in Windsor. I did not think much of it but broke my tooth. An abscess developed behind the tooth. The tooth was pulled out while I was eating and driving out of a parking lot. It smelled as if there was a dead body in the car with me. Story 38. I worked at a clinic for homeless people before. There was a woman with wounds covering both her lower legs. The wounds were very deep, heavily infected, and full of black and greenish discharge. In warmer months, there was a maggot infestation. She would come occasionally for dressing changes. But with her health condition, untreated diabetes, and living situation, the wounds never healed. She had these wounds for several years, and they would leak fluid onto the floor, filling the room with a strong odor. I changed the dressing for her several times and still vividly remember the smell. She needed more medical attention than our clinic could provide, but due to past trauma with hospital settings, she always refused that option. I think about her often. It is very sad that this was not the only time I have seen wounds this severe. Story 39. River recovery bodies. The second worst is probably a pile of broccoli found in a van that froze and thawed all winter, then cooked part of the summer. Had to scrap that vehicle. It was worse than the human foot found in the car, which at least dried out some. Story 40. The time my dog thought the skunk was letting him sniff its rear end as a friendly gesture. It was not a friendly gesture. Story 41. Cat waste is the worst. I am a retired horse and mule farmer, so animal excrement is common. However, cat feces is especially unpleasant. The worst scenario is taking off work boots only to discover I have tracked it into the house. Story 42. In high school, someone placed a yogurt behind the radiator in the stairwell. Took them a week to figure it out. Nobody used those stairs that whole time. Story 43. When I was a child, we killed a snake and, for some reason, put it in a jar with a lid. My brother opened the lid on the jar about a week later inside the house. It was pretty awful. Story 44. This is a tough one, but I have a few. My town flooded not too long ago. Having to clean out my apartment while breathing in the smell of the slime that was left behind was pretty gross. My parents also made my sister and me clean out a failed attempt at a root cellar in our basement when we were kids. It was full of rotten potatoes. Lastly, my ex was given some bear meat once, and the smell of it cooking permeated the whole house. I told him he was never cooking it again. Story 45. Once in my city, the cellars or refrigerators of the morgue were damaged. There was a record of about 12 bodies that were already beginning to decompose. The truth is that just by looking at the morgue building, I cannot forget the smell. Story 46. I was just in a vacation rental that smelled like mothballs, dead mice, hints of sweat, and a peppery kind of sickness that I could not quite place. I need to upload all of the photos I took to an image hosting site so I can have a link to them before I write the lengthy, detailed 1-star review. Story 47. Some odors that linger in the men's restroom are unpleasant, along with the bad breath some individuals have. Story 48. The softball-sized wad of human waste and used tampons that I had to pull out of our station's sewage grinder by hand. I am very happy I have an information technology desk job now. Story 49. Parvo. I worked at a pet store in high school, and you can definitely smell when one of the animals has parvovirus. It is a very serious situation because it is highly contagious to dogs and often fatal. I am fortunate I never brought it home to my own dogs. Story 50. I once exhumed a body, or what used to be a body. The deeper we dug, the wetter the soil became. Eventually, it got so muddy that the groundwater came over the tops of the rubber boots and soaked my jeans and socks. The stench washed out okay, but the skin that made contact with them absorbed the smell and clung to me for days. It was appalling. Story 51. A student passed away in a nearby dorm as spring was turning into summer. A resident assistant found her after some complaints just before graduation. Walking through the empty halls afterward, one could smell disinfectant, and beneath that was the subtle smell of decay. The mix of those two in a dark, vacated, old New England hallway, alongside squeaky floorboards and cobwebs illuminated by sunlight, will always hold a strange place in memory. Story 52. I've worked with many animals and babysat a lot as a child. Poop and animal grossness is not a big deal to me. A while ago, my puppies stole a bottle of vitamin gummies from somewhere unknown and ate the entire thing. The gummies were sugarless and contained xylitol, which meant we had to pack up in the car and go to the emergency veterinarian. The dogs are fine because I got there in time. I cried a lot, and my older dog was sicker since she ate half the bottle to keep the younger dog from getting it, according to dog logic. Everyone ended up fine except for the credit card and some years off my life. I brought them home the next day and was told they were doing okay, but their stomachs might be upset due to treatment, stress, and the xylitol. I understood since I would probably have digestive issues too after a near-death experience. I sleep with both dogs in my room, so when we returned, I instantly fell asleep because I had cried all day and spent most of the night at the vet. At some point, one of the dogs, either the older dog or the puppy, had an accident and pooped in the room. I'm not upset since upset stomachs were expected and it was beyond their control. However, the smell from the poop was terrible and woke me up immediately. Fortunately, the dog pooped on some clothing that had missed the laundry basket, so cleanup was relatively easy. I just scooped up the dress and threw it away because it was beyond saving. Normally, I'm okay with animal grossness and smells, but I was gagging and trying not to vomit. It smelled like something awful, especially after a night of curry and fast food. It was a uniquely terrible experience. Both dogs are fine now, drive me nuts regularly, but have not eaten garbage in a long time. In summary, xylitol can be deadly to dogs, and if they survive, the smell from their digestion might nearly kill you. Story 53. I once saw a dead animal on the beach that I could not immediately identify. I went in for a closer look. It was a dolphin, and the smell coming from it was so bad it seemed to stick to my nose hairs. I could still smell it for about 3 days afterward. It was not a normal decomposition smell like roadkill. This one was, I do not know, sweeter. Totally gross. Story 54. Contracting methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus after the birth of my daughter. I caught it while essentially living in the neonatal intensive care unit and using hospital toilets during postpartum. I smelled like rotting beef, and the odor could be detected from outside my house. I briefly considered isolating myself. Story 55. We went catfishing and my friend brought frozen chicken livers. He threw them on the dashboard and ran the defrost for an hour. Wretched. Story 56. Surströmming. Canned fish from Sweden. It is rotten from the core. Imagine 20 rotten mammals multiplied by a Google. Story 57. For me, it was a decomposing dog found in a shed on a hot summer day. The dog had cancer and should have been put down long ago. She was ripe, full of maggots. The poor animal control officer had to use a shovel to put her in a bag. He was pale when he was done. Story 58. For me, it was an unmaintained grease trap at a restaurant. The owner did not know that maintenance was required, so it sat there for a year or two. Fats, oils, and food particles were trapped in a sealed container for years. Many other answers involve decomposing humans, and now I am wondering how they compare. Story 59. When my brother and I were children, we were at a hotel in the sauna, and he thought it would be funny to urinate on the coals while we were inside. The resulting smell is still vivid in my memory 30 years later. Story 60. I worked at an animal shelter. The kennel drains were clogged with lots of fecal matter for years. Being an animal shelter, we couldn't afford emergency service fees on a Saturday in summer, so I removed the caps and scraped the clog away. It was rotting, putrid, nasty brown and gray. I know what death smells like. This was worse. More than 15 years later, it is still burned into my brain. Story 61. My stillborn daughter, whom I placed in a mason jar and hid from my family in my car until I could afford to have her cremated. She was so tiny, a little bigger than a large onion. It was worse than Clostridioides difficile infection. A smell you never forget. Story 62. My roommate caught a fish, made a fish dish, and then let the fish dish rot in the Tupperware for months. She said she did not want to throw out the Tupperware because it was expensive, and I got tired of looking at it. The Tupperware was thrown out after I cracked it open. Story 63. So far, I have not seen a clogged or exploded restaurant grease trap. Years ago, I was a bartender and waiter, and our dishwasher was 4 stair steps down. One day, it became clogged and then exploded. The whole dishwasher station started flooding. You could smell it throughout the entire 2-floor restaurant, but the owner insisted we just keep going. Story 64. Very few things actually make me gag, but when the delicatessen or the meat department throw garbage meat in the compactor and do not press the button, I am gagging, especially this past week since it has been in the 90s. Story 65. The Viking Village ride at the Jorvik Viking Center in York, United Kingdom. I did not need to know what rotten food and Viking odor smelled like. Thanks. Story 66. Surgeon removing a sebaceous cyst from a patient's back. I can't even describe how foul the smell was, but the operating room cleared out quickly. The surgeon had someone else close and left early. Unfortunately, I was there until the end, as I was the one passing instruments to the doctor wrapping up the surgery. Story 67. A dead baby donkey was found under a house. It likely got stuck under a tall crawl space when the door was open. I was doing a home inspection and discovered it. I informed the homeowners. They were all careless, saying, "Oh, I thought I heard some pounding last week." They asked, "Can you get it out?" I said no, and if I did, I would charge $1,000. They called my company, and my manager said it would cost $2,000. I left. I am not doing that work for free. Story 68. My mom, who is hoarding tendencies, left a bag of potatoes rotting on her kitchen counter for an unknown amount of time. She thought the smell was dog urine on the kitchen trash bin, but it was actually these disgusting potatoes that were already liquefying. I went to pick up the bag to throw it out, and I nearly vomited and had difficulty smelling things properly for a few days afterward. Actually, this describes her whole house when she's having bad days, and I can't check on her enough. I love my mom, but hoarder houses are not pleasant at all. Story 69. Man on the bus. Clearly homeless, face covered in unusual sores. He walked past me to sit down, and his presence hit me like someone just threw rotting meat and battery acid in my face. I threw all my clothes in the washer and immediately took a shower as soon as I got home. I still feel really bad for that man and whatever he was going through to reach that state. Story 70. Pig and animal carcasses were left in a neighbor's compost. It was a school bus stop, and thankfully the stop was moved after weeks of the nasty smell while waiting for the bus. It was like one of those places where farm animal bodies are disposed of, the worst smell ever. Story 71. The smell of a rotting human is the worst. I discovered the unpleasantness of the smell as a student nurse, and now I literally cannot forget it. I'll be somewhere random, and that thick, pungent odor comes past me, and I just know. Story 72. Certified nursing assistant, and for me it is death. Not a dead body or a rotted body, but the coming of death. It is a very specific smell. Dying patients and residents usually start smelling of death a few days before they pass. It is one of the only smells that made my body feel like it needed to get out of the room. The other one is really bad breath, but it is usually the kind that is very similar to death. Bad breath caused by rot and decay in their mouths. It is just death but moist and attached to a living person. A lot of other terrible smells I have noticed though. Clostridioides difficile, infected wounds and abscesses, many kinds of vomit, the stinkiest and cheesiest feet you can imagine, very strong urine, infected and nasty genitals, but death is the worst. Story 73. This one contract I worked in the microbiology department, which was a room that didn't have a door, it did have a hood, and was off the main laboratory, which was a very long room. The break room was at one end, and that was where everyone entered. The microbiology room was at the other end. I opened the door from the break room and was immediately hit with an extremely rancid smell. It turned out to be a rectal abscess. The previous shift had not only opened it but had spilled it in their rush to close it quickly. It was horrible. Another was the nursing home catheter urinary tract infections. A urinary tract infection is bad enough, but catheter-related ones are worse. If they don't clean or change the catheter tubing, the urine inside the tube gelatinizes, and bacteria ferment in there. The smell is so terrible you can smell it through the sealed biohazard bag. If the sample needs to be poured into several cups for different tests, it doesn't pour. It slops over in one complete slimy blob, and the explosion of rank, sour infection smell that escapes is horrifying. You never forget it. Third was a soldier who had gone on leave and died by suicide in his room. He was found about 2 weeks later because the smell was strong enough to be detected from the road. People taking the bus past his barracks complained. Story 74. Went for a hike one time in a forest in Malaysia and we came across the flower called Rafflesia. It was in full bloom and the smell, I swear to God, was like a corpse. Story 75. Mom and I decided to finally cut into the watermelon we got as a treat. I felt it was bouncy but thought nothing of it. As soon as the knife hit the surface, it exploded into a liquid, slimy, rotten watermelon mess. She and I both immediately went to the bathroom to throw up. It got everywhere. I had never smelled anything like that before or since. I have no idea what happened. Luckily, my brother was congested and couldn't smell anything, so he cleaned it up because we couldn't get near it. I usually have a strong stomach and have smelled thousands of other vile things, but this was beyond reason. Story 76. I worked at a bookstore years ago, and we had a regular customer we nicknamed Ipecac. He smelled so bad that it literally made you gag. The best way I could describe it was a rotting crotch smell. The man would also blow his nose into his shirt sleeve while in the store. I almost vomited once while ringing him up. Story 77. Former theater nurse here. I'm not sure if I can narrow it down, But one case I will never forget was an elderly patient undergoing exploratory surgery for a suspected malignant gut obstruction. It certainly was malignant. The smell of rotten flesh was indescribable. The poor soul was being eaten from the inside. Even with a mask on and Vicks rubbed under my nostrils, the odor was overwhelming. Story 78. Necrotizing fasciitis is a severe bacterial infection that destroys skin, fat, and the tissue covering the muscles. During this process, some of the skin dies, and it produces a very unpleasant odor. Story 79. Definitely human decomposition. There is almost nothing like it. It is sulfuric but also sweet-smelling, and it completely permeated the house. A reclusive elderly couple died in their home, on the kitchen floor to be specific, and were not found for months. My mother had to prepare their belongings for the estate sale, and I guess could not find a babysitter that day. Story 80. When I was a veterinary nurse, we had to place a stomach tube in a dog who had developed bloat after eating the remnants of days-old prolapse from a deceased horse. It was not a good experience. Story 81. Worked at a facility that disposed of medical waste from hospitals, doctors, and medical laboratories. Biosecurity, if it exists, I have probably encountered it. The worst smell would have to be formaldehyde, as it feels like you have a face full of wasabi in every membrane. Story 82. Crack cocaine. Someone was smoking it in a car park stairwell, and it was the most horrendous unnatural smell I have ever experienced. Story 83. Torn between someone's vomit after they drank 5 liters of red wine and my cat's bowel movements just before he died on Monday. Both were equally unpleasant and stayed with me for a while. Story 84. I worked with an older man who had multiple fungating tumors on his body. He was bald and had one in the middle of his head that looked like a chimney. It often oozed a pastel pink liquid, a combination of blood and pus. The smell of that man will haunt me forever. He was literally rotting alive. He refused to see a doctor. He died a few years later at age 55. It was a sad situation for him. He had no family and was never married. Story 85. Sydney Flight Catering autoclave and grease arrestor is worse than anything I have smelled in 25 years of plumbing. Story 86. Probably by design, but the smell of a dead human is one of the more offensive odors. I would assume most people's instinctive brain reacts by signaling to get away. Story 87. My brother found an abandoned goose egg and put it in a kitchen cupboard. He forgot about it. One morning, we heard a pop, and suddenly the stench of liquefied, putrid dead gosling filled our kitchen. Story 88. A fish market in Tanzania in the middle of summer around noon. The only time I have ever turned physically green from a smell. I vomited everywhere. Story 89. Many years ago, a woman was readmitted a week after her cesarean section because her wound was infected and coming apart. We had to drain it and pack it every day. The discharge was severe, and we had to place her at the far end of the ward in a single room because the smell made the corridor unusable. She hated herself and kept apologizing. She must have been completely unaware of the comments from visitors outside her room. It took about 5 days to reduce the infection enough for surgical cleaning and repair. Now, vacuum dressings have mostly eliminated infections like that, and I have not seen anything like it in years, but I still think of that poor woman. Story 90. A man at a library where I worked had a black, oozing wound on his foot or ankle. The black, smelly ooze left a trail all around. The smell was horrendous. Story 91. Rotting cow placenta pulled fresh from the animal's infected vulva. Never before had I encountered a smell that made me scream. Story 92. In a laboratory, a media plate of Clostridioides difficile. Someone was a little too clumsy. And yes, I can still smell that. Shudders. Story 93. Sent this to Purina. Hi, I would like to start by saying that your Felix, as good as it looks, cat food is the only food my cat will eat. Due to the cost savings and the fact that I can get the specific flavors my cat enjoys, I have been using your pick and mix service. For the most part, both my cat and I are very satisfied with the product. However, we occasionally find a burst pouch or two. I dispose of the burst pouch and think nothing further of it. However, with my last purchase, I found no less than 7 compromised pouches. One of these was your salmon in jelly product. My nose has experienced some truly horrendous smells in its life. For example, I have cleaned out blocked drains and toilets, dealt with rotten refuse, and until recently, the worst smell I encountered was a 2-week-old decapitated pig's head at a farm experience in Australia. These odors pale in comparison to the smell coming from the compromised Felix. As good as it looks, salmon pouch. The English language lacks the adjectives to adequately describe the smell. It felt like something physical had hit me in the face with great force. I had to individually wash every pouch in the box, where I found an additional 6 compromised pouches, although none with the odor of the first. Please could I request additional quality assurance checks to ensure this does not happen again? Additionally, could I receive a discount code to apply to my next order to compensate me for the multiple compromised pouches I have received over the past couple of years? Regards, my name, Cat Dad, wife's name, Cat Mom, and Nimble Cat. Story 94. Might not be the absolute worst smell, but it made me feel the most disgusting. I climb cellular towers for a living. Vultures really like roosting on cellular towers and cause damage. Cellular carriers do not like damage. So to discourage vultures from roosting, we sometimes have to hang dead vultures from the towers. We get the dead ones from Game and Wildlife and they start frozen, but summers are hot and they thaw fast. You have to climb quickly and be the first person climbing because the second person gets dead vulture condensation dripped on them. Story 95. Clostridium difficile infection. The poor woman had diabetes and developed gangrene in her toes. She was in a side room with the door closed, but you could still smell it as you entered the ward. She was very ill and barely conscious, so she needed to be close to the nurse's station. Staff took turns caring for her because the smell was nauseating, but her husband sat with her from 2 p.m. until 8 p.m. every day. Over the weeks, the surgeon kept taking her back to the operating room to amputate more of her leg. Eventually, they discussed a hindquarter resection, which no one in the hospital had ever performed before. This would have meant she lost half her pelvis and her left buttock. She died before the surgeon had a chance to try the new procedure. I will never forget the kindness and fortitude of all the staff involved, and I hope that she rests in peace. Story 96. Rotting teeth. We encounter many people who do harmful things, but chewing pills causes teeth to decay. The smell is almost indescribable. Imagine the worst morning breath mixed with a rotting carcass. Story 97. Clostridium difficile and gastrointestinal bleeding. I worked as an intensive care unit registered nurse for many years, and those are by far the worst smells I have ever encountered in my life. They are extremely unpleasant. Story 98. I had a friend who found the toenail of another friend's dog and thought it would be funny to burn it with a lighter. I think they can probably still smell it in that house. Story 99. Cleaning a chicken coop in the brutal heat of summer. I am a person who can handle smells. I notice them, I recognize they are terrible, but I can power through them. However, that chicken coop pushed me to my limits. I cleaned it, but I emerged a different person. Story 100. When my dog's anal leakage got on my hoodie, I had never seen that before. I brought it up to my nose and took a big sniff. 0 out of 10. Story 101. I worked in a jail for years. There were many unpleasant smells, but the worst was a homeless man who took off his socks, and his skin peeled off with them. It is hard to describe the smell. Story 102. Swedish surströmming. Salted, fermented herring. If you open the tin can above water, the smell immediately engulfs the surrounding area. A colleague of mine opened it outside. We were 20 yards away, and within a few seconds we could smell it. It has an intense, strong sewage odor. Several people retched when the smell hit. My colleague had to eat some of it, and he still talks about how the smell stuck to his mustache even after several showers. Nasty stuff. Story 103. My girlfriend developed a specific type of cyst that occurs in the area between the buttocks. We treated it at home by carefully draining it, and it had a strong odor resembling wet garbage mixed with waste and something decayed. Story 104. Number 1 spot for me is smelling gangrene. You will never forget that smell. Number 2 is Clostridioides difficile infection. It is horrible. Number 3 is probably rotting flesh. I am a hospital worker, by the way. Story 105, rat bomb in high school. A serious geek who was being bullied placed one in a jock's BMW 2002 under the seat on a warm day. About 36 hours later, it exploded and could be smelled hundreds of yards from the student parking lot. Rat bomb. Large ball jar, dead rat, a few inches of hydrogen peroxide, a few inches of water. Will liquefy, cause putrescence multiplied by 10, then explode and make anything it touches completely ruined and permanently foul-smelling. Story 106. I have been waiting for this. My wife and I were in Amsterdam last summer, and I got a little too high from the local green stuff. We went to a beer bar we liked and sat at a small table outside. For about 15 minutes, I sat there profusely sweating, with my head spinning, leaning and looking like someone way higher than just on weed. After about 15 minutes, I snapped out of it, sat up straight, and we ordered a couple of beers. My wife wanted a bite, so she ordered a cheese board. A few minutes later, the guy brought out the cheese and other goodies. I still had a good buzz, so she cut the cheese and started eating some. Something smelled a little off, but since we were sitting right on the river, I thought maybe it was that. It wasn't. I picked up one of the pieces of cheese, took a whiff, and loudly said, "Oh no!" It was literally the worst thing I have ever smelled in my entire life. It smelled like decaying organic matter. I mean, it was awful. The 10 or 12 people sitting around us looked at me like, "What's with this guy?" My wife was thoroughly embarrassed, and I was like, "Oops." Honestly, it was nasty. When I smelled it and said those words, I didn't even think. The words just blurted out of my mouth. Story 107. Sitting in the front row of a Trump rally last July, my nostrils suddenly flared in disgust as the unmistakable stench of a dirty diaper wafted over the crowd. Unfortunately, I had just consumed a loaded taco, which I proceeded to vomit all over my new Make America Great Again t-shirt. The only silver lining was that I switched party allegiance in November. Story 108. A very obese lady's apartment. The place had not seen a mop or a good wipe down in decades. Together with her body odor, it was horrible. I had to wear a mask there. The property manager informed me she had not left the apartment in years, and I believe it. It was sad. Story 109. A rotten dead bird flushed out of my gutter once. I had to bury it, and unwise to do so, I moved it near the location where I was digging to bury it before actually doing so. Story 110. An 8 on the raspberry scale. Raspberry is slang for flatulence. The situation involved 4 changing rooms, a shower, and 6 people working together to clean. Story 111. A commercial composting plant. I toured one as a thank you trip for volunteer work I did in high school with the local Kiwanis Club. Imagine the smell of hundreds of piles of animal feces and food waste, each 2 to 3 stories high, baking in the sun across several square miles. That was when I learned that smells could hurt your nostrils. The smell seeped into everyone's clothes as well. The hour-long van ride home was atrocious. When I got home, I had to throw away my entire outfit, shoes and all. Story 112. Decay. A dog killed a stray cat under my house. I was not aware until the smell started coming through my vents with a temperature of 98 degrees Fahrenheit outside. It was horrible. Story 113. Worked in the perishables department, handling meats and vegetables, in a grocery store. Even after 20 years away from that job, the smell of rotten potatoes or a rotten watermelon remains some of the worst odors I have ever experienced. Once, when I had a wart burned off my finger, even the smell of my own flesh burning was more tolerable than those. Story 114. Rotten cauliflower. I forgot a container of it at the back of our garage refrigerator after a party. I came home from vacation to find the refrigerator smelling terrible. I found the glass container and, foolishly, opened it to wash it out. One smell of that and I threw up. The entire container went into the trash, and I swear on warm days I can still catch a whiff of it 3 years later. Story 115. Dead dog. It has been dead for a while. You could actually see the bone. It was a sunny day in Michigan. Story 116. Maybe not the worst, but we had a rat die in the wall of our linen closet in the summer in California. The whole hallway and bathroom were disgusting for about a week. And when the air conditioning would kick on. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.